Hey cinematographers, this is the Blackmagic 6K Cinema Camera. It's big, particularly the 13cm diagonal screen on the back. It does feel a little plasticky. Let me plug it in so you can have a look at the image it creates. You have been asking me to review this camera and its 4K partner, and it wasn't easy to convince Blackmagic's media agency. However, better late than never. This camera is very interesting but also challenging. Interesting because its capabilities don't often intersect with this price. Challenging because its approach isn't like most cameras I review. The 6K Cinema Camera has a 23 by 13mm sensor that's called Super 35. The resolution is 6144 by 3456, that's about 21 megapixels, and it's a 16:9 aspect ratio. Blackmagic doesn't make or sell lenses. This camera uses the Canon EF lens mount, so there are lots of lens options out there. EF lenses on this sensor crop to about 1.5. Now, the menu and the screen makes it clear that this is not the world of stills or video, but cinema at an advanced level. The Blackmagic Cinema Camera is not like the others. It has a steep learning curve. Even for those with broadcast or cinema experience, you may be repeatedly frustrated as you learn and manage its powerful capabilities. Don't expect to be productive for at least a week. And your investment doesn't stop with the camera. You'll need new media, spending hours searching for the CFast disks and SSD drives on Blackmagic's supported media list. You'll need a substantially more capable power source than the included internal battery. Now, out of the box, it's suitable for studio use, but that's like driving a sports car in rush hour. I've posted a video that details that use case. Let's try an interior natural light scene to give you a good sense of the image quality this camera delivers. And to indulge my cinematic pretensions, I've configured the camera to shoot at the 17:9 5744 by 3024 resolution. That's actually 5.7K. The 6K setting uses the full sensor. 5.7 is a crop from the full sensor. The other 17:9 settings are scaled from this crop. Other 16:9 settings are scaled from the full sensor. And that's the settings that I've used for this review, unless I've told you different. However, I'll note that menu captures in the review are from 4K originals shot with a camera, as the cinema camera doesn't output the menu to HDMI. And while it does output the live screens with overlay, those are HD originals. That's the maximum resolution of the HDMI output. Keeping with the cinema theme, I'm recording at a non-drop 24 frames. Now, I've rendered this video out for YouTube at 4K 24 frames. All of the scenes, including the menu captures, were recorded at 24 frames. So if your screen refreshes at 30, it's making a pull-down adjustment from 24 to 30 frames. At 6K, frame rates from 24 drop to 50 non-drop are available. And when off-speed is selected, any rate from 5 to 50 frames can be set. At 5.7, 17:9, the maximum frame rate is 60. At 2.8, 17:9, up to 120 frames can be selected using the off-speed setting. So if you're looking for a camera to emulate the 18 frame rate of silent movies, this is it. The shutter is set by angle, the cinematic standard for setting shutter duration. It's a reference to the physical circular analog shutter disc, which would spin in front of the gate in a film camera. The cinema standard of 180 degrees at 24 frames per second would be 1/48th of a second. That changes as you change the frame rate, so 30 frames would be 1/60th. Smaller and larger angles are available, as well as an auto exposure setting. Now, if that feels unfamiliar, the menu can change the setting to shutter duration. Auto exposure is available here. by adjusting only the shutter duration, by first adjusting the shutter and then the iris, or by first adjusting the iris and then the shutter duration. That's a nice amount of flexibility to have if you're using auto exposure. Now, I'm using the dynamic range film setting, providing the largest dynamic range using a log curve. And I have adjusted this recording for exposure and color in editing to conform to Rec. 709. And that's the nice thing about recording RAW. You're not locked into settings like white balance, and there's a great deal more exposure latitude available in the Edit Suite, providing enormous creative freedom. All of these controls are adjusted using touch on screen. Touch to select, tap to change. When you're done, move on. No need to press an OK key. Within an hour, you'll be wondering why other cameras don't make better use of touch. Across the top, you can set the frame rate, and note that when off speed is active, both the recording rate and the project frame rate are displayed. Then the shutter, aperture, ISO, white balance and tint, and the battery status. Across the bottom, there's histogram, record button, that's in addition to the one on top and the one in front for vloggers, and the card status, which also provides access to format, and audio meters, which can set input and headphone levels. The top right is a button that sets display options. Zebra, levels from 75 to 100, peaking, one color, red, 3 intensities, aspect outlines, framing guidelines, a bunch of presets, or press to create a custom setting, grids, including a horizontal and vertical level, as well as adjustable safe area, 0 to 100%, which can be very useful for recording 4K or HD using the full sensor to make adjustments in post. There is a monitor customization screen. Clean Feed will turn off all the display options and other options which can be set independently. This screen also controls the HDMI output, which can be the same or independent. The HDMI output can be configured as cinematographer, displaying camera settings, or for the director and PA, displaying reel, scene, take, and timecode. However, there's no option to display the menu on the HDMI out. It appears only on the LCD. Swipe right from the main screen to set project information and clip detail, including the scene and take. The reel number is set from the number assigned when the media is formatted. During playback, the last clip can be labeled as good take. Wait, there's more. Scene numbering can include shot type like close-up. Take can include detail like pickup. That kicks it up a notch. The 6K resolution can be recorded using Blackmagic's 12-bit RAW format. Depending on your settings, it's compressed at 3, 5, 8, or 12 to 1. So using 12 to 1, the file is 1/12 what it would be if the raw data were uncompressed. I'll go into details on media in a minute, but media limitations kept my production to 5 to 1. Using a constant bitrate, data rates range from 323 megabytes per second at 3 to 1 down to 81 megabytes per second at 12 to 1, or constant quality Q0 up to 483 megabytes, Q5 to 139. With constant bitrate, compression increases with the complexity of the scene. Constant quality means the bitrate increases to accommodate the additional data. On a platform like YouTube, some may not notice the difference between 5 to 1 and 12 to 1. The RAW formats don't include 4K 17:9 or HD. The alternate to RAW is 10-bit ProRes, which maxes to 4K DCI 17:9, with the 422 HQ profile up to 118 megabytes per second. That feels unnecessarily limited. While RAW files are recorded from the full or a windowed view of the sensor, ProRes recordings are scaled down from the full sensor. One more thing, Timelapse. Turn it on and select the capture speed from every other frame to 1 frame every 10 minutes. The only limitation is card space, and there's no need to predetermine how long you want. Stop recording when you've got what you want. Now, between RAW and ProRes, there are lots of resolutions, including 2.4:1 and anamorphic, all the way down to HD 1080. And that covers most cinematic and video requirements. Now, I said that media was a challenge. The highest quality settings create enormous files, and while that provides rich and detailed images, you'll be buying storage by the terabyte. At 24 frames, a terabyte holds about an hour. Shoot at 50 frames and you'll get half that. Work your way down from there. Even at 4K DCI with ProRes HQ, a 128 SD card holds 20 minutes. Now, you may be wondering what media is going to support those high data rates. Great question. But it's complicated. The 6K Cinema Camera has both SD and CFast 2 slots, and external recording is supported on SSD drives connected to the USB-C port. Blackmagic Support site provides a list of which media support which settings, and make no assumptions. Although the Samsung T5 drive is supported, the upgraded T7 is not. I tried it. Doesn't work. And just because some SD cards rated V90 work, that doesn't mean they all do. Read the details carefully. Now on the list, CFast and USB-C supports up to 6K Blackmagic RAW 5.1 at 50 frames. SD supports up to 6K 16:9 Blackmagic RAW 5.1 at 30 frames. Complicated means that according to the list, we're still waiting for media that supports the 3:1 compression setting for Blackmagic RAW. Now, media can be formatted using either exFAT or OSX extended. And a handy feature names cards with sequential numbers. And the failsafe format process means you're unlikely to format a card accidentally. There's a full-sized HDMI port supporting 10-bit 422. However, the output maxes to 1080p 60, which is very disappointing. There are no artificial recording time limits. You're limited only by available card or drive space. The camera can be remote controlled using an iPad, turn on Bluetooth, and using the Blackmagic Camera Control app, connect to the camera. The screen can start and stop recording and adjust any of the indicated settings, but not with the same range. For instance, shutter can set 1/30th and 1/50th, but not 1/48th. Had to reset that on the camera. Tap the slate at the bottom to update the metadata settings. For my studio lighting, with the iris at f2, I've set the ISO to 400. That's one of 2 native ISOs. There is an auto iris button, which makes a one-time adjustment to set the aperture for the current scene. You can then use the front dial and the touch controls for manual adjustments. To judge exposure, the camera's LCD has a histogram, bottom left, and zebra. Press the button on the top left to switch from one to the other. Zebra can be set with 5-step increments from 75 to 100. Settings down to 50 would be helpful for setting exposure to skin tones. False color provides a useful alternate. For dark settings, black areas are good, blue and purple are crushed. Yellow and red indicate overexposure and clipping. Pink at one stop over middle gray might be a good way to judge skin tones. Now, I said the camera had a native ISO of 400. That's used at ISO settings from 100 to 1000. From 1250 to 25600, the native ISO is 3200. As the manual says, if you can avoid using 1000 and go to 1250 instead, you'll have cleaner results. Incidentally, no auto ISO. The native ISO also impacts the available dynamic range. The manual has a handy chart. From 100 to 1000, it's about 13 stops, decreases to about 10.7 stops at ISO 25.6. According to the chart, highlight definition is best between 400 and 1000 and over 8000. Now, this is useful information. I wish all manufacturers provided this detail. This 35mm prime opens to f1.8, and with 24 frames set for a 180 shutter, that's already giving the camera a good low-light handicap for this one-candle scene. I've turned the white balance down to 2500 Kelvin, and this is the 5.7K RAW setting with the dynamic range set to film. I like the look of this scene with the ISO at 8000. However, I thought you'd also want to see the maximum ISO, 25,600. Let me also try that with ProRes. So this original is 4K DCI, and I'm using the video dynamic range, which makes the scene a lot brighter. We're still at the maximum, ISO 25,600. And finally, for comparison, this is the ISO 8000 that I used in the first part of this scene.